Emma stood in the middle of the busy office, her hands shaking as papers fell all around her like a small storm of white sheets floating to the floor. And everyone laughed, the sound echoing like cruel music that filled the whole room and burned. Deep inside her chest, she tried to pick up the papers quickly, her fingers trembling, but the laughter only grew louder, like waves crashing again and again around her. She could feel her face turning red and her heart beating so fast it almost hurt. She whispered sorry in a soft voice that no one cared to hear. Her manager, Olivia, stood near her desk watching with a proud smirk. Her arms crossed and her chin slightly lifted. She loved moments like this because it made her feel powerful and important. In front of everyone, Olivia said loudly, "Emma, maybe you should practice walking before you try to work." The whole office laughed again. Emma wanted to disappear into the floor. She knelt down, trying to gather the papers, her long hair falling over. Her face to hide her tears, she thought about how everyone saw her as just a poor simple girl who did not belong there. She wore plain clothes, clean but old. Her shoes had small scratches. Her bag was secondhand while the other women wore shiny heels and bright designer dresses. Every day she came early before everyone else and worked late after everyone left. But no one noticed her hard work. They only saw what she wore. They judged her for not being like them. Emma always smiled politely and kept quiet because she believed that kindness was stronger than pride. But in that moment it was so hard to stay calm. Olivia looked at her again and said in a cold voice, "You will never move up in life if you keep dressing like that." Emma lifted her head slowly, her eyes wet but steady, and said softly, "I am not trying to move up, I am just trying to do my job well." Some people near her stopped laughing, but Olivia rolled her eyes and said, "Sure you are, sweetie," then turned away, pretending to be busy on her phone. The laughter faded, but the pain in Emma's chest stayed. She sat down quietly at her desk, trying to act normal. But every whisper felt like a knife. She could feel people staring at her. She tried to breathe deeply and focus on her computer, but her eyes kept blurring with tears. She wondered why being kind always seemed so hard in this place, why good people were always the ones others stepped on. As the clock reached noon, Emma stood up for her lunch break. She grabbed her small lunchbox and walked out slowly through the glass doors. The air outside was cool and soft on her face. She closed her eyes for a second, letting the city noise drown out the echo of laughter still ringing in her head. She found a quiet bench under a tree across the street and sat down, opening her lunch of rice and vegetables. She looked at the tall buildings around her and felt very small, like she was part of a world that did not see her. But she never complained. She never told anyone about her real life because her heart believed that love did not need to be shown to be true. Her phone buzzed beside her. She picked it up and saw a message on the screen that made her breath stop. It said, "I will come see you today. Dear." Heart skipped like a drum. She stared at the message, her hands shaking slightly. D was her husband, Daniel Grant. The name no one at her office knew. She smiled through her tears, a soft smile that brought a bit of light back to her eyes. Daniel never came to her office before. He respected her wish to keep their marriage private. Emma remembered the night he had promised to protect her always. He had said, "My love, you are stronger than you think. You do not need to show the world who you are because your heart already shines brighter than gold." She had believed him. She still did, but part of her wondered what he would say if he saw how cruel people could be to her here. She looked around the park, feeling nervous, her mind racing. Would he really come? Would he walk into that office filled with people who thought she was nothing? What would they say when they saw him? She imagined their faces and felt her stomach twist, both in fear and strange excitement. The wind brushed her hair gently. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "It will be fine. Maybe today something will change." She finished her lunch quietly and walked back to the office, her steps slow but firm, each one echoing like a silent promise she would not cry again. She would not let their laughter break her. She would face them with the same grace she always had. Inside the building, the sound of keyboards clicking and phones ringing surrounded her again. She smiled politely at the receptionist who barely looked up. Emma sat back at her desk, her heart still beating fast. She read Daniel's message again and placed her phone carefully beside her notebook. Her eyes lifted toward the office door for a second, and she thought she heard the distant sound of a car stopping outside. She did not know it yet, but the world that had laughed at her was about to see something it would never forget. When Emma returned home that evening, she stepped out of the taxi and walked through the tall iron gates of her house. The guards nodded politely and opened the door. She smiled at them softly, still holding her worn brown handbag, the one her coworkers always laughed at. She walked along the stone path lined with roses blooming under the soft orange light of sunset, and for a moment she felt the heavy weight of the day slowly fade away. The front door opened before she could even reach it. The maids were already waiting inside, greeting her warmly with respect and care. She smiled again, though her heart still carried the pain from the laughter at work. She handed her bag to one of them and walked through the bright hallway where crystal lights sparkled above her, and the smell of lavender filled the air. She looked around at the white marble floor and the big paintings on the wall and whispered quietly to herself, "They would never believe this." Emma walked into her room and sat on the edge of her soft white bed. She removed her shoes and looked at her feet. Sore from the long day at work, she could still hear Olivia's sharp voice mocking her in front of everyone. Her eyes grew wet again, but before the tears could fall, she took a deep breath and looked at the framed photo on her bedside table. It was her and Daniel smiling under the stars on their wedding night. Daniel Grant was not just any man, he was one of the richest businessmen in the city. People said his name with respect and sometimes fear, but Emma knew a different side of him. She knew the man who loved simple things, like cooking breakfast on weekends and watching old movies with her on rainy nights. He had a gentle smile and a heart that always listened. He had met Emma long before the money, the fame and the power, back when he was still fighting to build his company, and she had stood by him every step of the way. They had married quietly, without cameras, without guests, only a few close friends and a priest under the soft glow of fairy lights in Daniel's backyard. That night he had promised her that he would always protect her, and she had promised that she would love him not for what he owned but for who he was. Since then they had lived a quiet and private life away from attention. Daniel respected Emma's wish to continue working as a normal woman. She wanted to live like everyone else, to stay humble and grounded. She believed money should never change who she was. He had agreed. But now he worried every day because he knew how cruel people could be. He had seen it before. He had seen fake smiles and sharp tongues, and now Emma was facing all of that alone. As Emma sat quietly in her room, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Daniel standing at the door wearing a gray suit, his tie slightly loose, his eyes soft but serious. He said nothing at first. He just walked over and sat beside her. He took her hand gently and said in his calm, deep voice, "You cried today, didn't you?" She looked away and tried to smile, but her lips trembled. She said, "No, I didn't cry." He looked into her eyes and said, "Emma, I can tell when you lie." She sighed and leaned her head on his shoulder, whispering, "They laughed at me again." Daniel's hand tightened around hers. He closed his eyes for a moment, then said, "I told you I can come and pick you up someday so they can see who you really are, but you said no." Emma lifted her head and looked at him. Her eyes filled with both love and worry. She said softly, "I just wanted to see if kindness can change people. I didn't want them to respect me because of your name. I wanted them to respect me because of who I am." Daniel smiled faintly and brushed her hair back from her face. He admired her strength, but his heart ached to see her hurt. He said, "Maybe it's time they learn who you are, not because you need to prove anything, but because they need to learn a lesson." Emma shook her head slowly. She said, "Not yet. I can handle it. I just need to be strong a little longer." He looked at her carefully and said, "All right, my love, but promise me if they hurt you again, you'll tell me." She nodded quietly and rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. It made her feel safe, like nothing bad could reach her as long as he was there. The house was silent except for the faint sound of rain starting outside, soft drops tapping against the window glass. After a while, Daniel stood up and said, "I have to prepare for tomorrow's meeting, but I'll see you for dinner." He kissed her forehead gently before leaving the room. Emma watched him go, her heart warm yet heavy. She walked to the window and looked. Out at the rain, it fell softly on the garden lights, reflecting on each drop. She whispered to herself, "Maybe tomorrow will be better." Her phone buzzed on the table again. It was a message from Daniel this time. It read, "Remember what I said I might come to see you tomorrow." Her hands froze. She felt her chest tighten, both in fear and excitement. She stared at the message for a long moment, unsure whether to smile or worry. If he came, everyone at her office would know everything. She closed her eyes and imagined the scene: Olivia's shocked face, her coworkers whispering, the silence that would fill the room. Part of her wanted that moment badly, but another part of her wanted to stay invisible. She didn't want revenge. She just wanted peace. That night, Emma lay in bed listening to the rain, her thoughts circling around Daniel's message, her heart whispering a single hope that maybe his visit could change everything. The next morning, Emma woke up early before the sun had fully risen, her heart still uneasy after reading Daniel's message. She moved slowly through her room, getting ready for work. The sound of rain from last night had faded, and now the air was fresh and cool outside. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, her eyes soft but tired. Her simple beige dress hung neatly on her shoulders. She tied her hair back and whispered to herself, "You can do this." She smiled faintly, but inside, she was trembling, because she knew what waited for her at the office. The car dropped her off at the same place as always. She walked past the tall glass doors and into the noisy office filled with people typing, talking, and laughing. She tried to blend in as usual, but the moment she stepped in, she could feel something was different. Everyone's eyes seemed to turn toward her. There were quiet whispers behind her back. She pretended not to hear them and went straight to her desk, but the air felt heavier than before. Olivia was standing by the coffee machine with two of her friends, their voices low but sharp. Emma caught a few words and her stomach tightened. Olivia said, "I heard she's been seeing some old man for money. That's why she's always so quiet, hiding her shame." The other women giggled cruelly. One of them added, "I bet he's broke too. Maybe that's why she looks like she shops at a charity box." They all laughed again, their laughter slicing through Emma like a knife. She sat down quickly, her hands cold, her heart heavy. She wanted to cry, but she couldn't. She bit her lip hard, trying to stay calm. She had promised Daniel she would be strong, but it was getting harder every day. She could feel the tears pressing behind her eyes. She opened her notebook, trying to focus on her work. The letters on the page began to blur. She blinked fast again and again, but the tears kept pushing through. She whispered to herself, "Stay calm. Just stay calm." Olivia walked over, holding a folder, pretending to be professional. She dropped it on Emma's desk and said loudly, "Maybe you can ask your boyfriend to buy you a new computer. This one looks old." Everyone around them chuckled. Emma looked up, her throat tight, but she said nothing. She just smiled, weakly. Olivia smirked and leaned closer, whispering, "Some of us actually work for our success, not buy it from men." Emma froze. The words hit her like a slap across the face. Her fingers clenched the pen tightly until it almost broke. For a long moment she sat still, her heart pounding in her ears. Then, slowly she stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. Everyone turned to look. The room went quiet. Emma's voice trembled, but it was clear enough for all to hear. She said softly, "I don't understand why kindness makes people angry. I never hurt anyone, I never judged anyone, so why do you enjoy hurting me?" Olivia blinked, pretending to look surprised, then smiled in a fake sweet tone. "Oh, Emma, don't be so sensitive. We're just having fun. You should learn to laugh." Emma shook her head. Her tears finally falling, she whispered, "I hope one day you learn that fun built on cruelty never lasts." Then she turned and walked toward the restroom. Her steps quick, her vision blurry. She pushed the door open and leaned against the sink, her whole body shaking. She looked at her reflection and could barely recognize herself. She whispered, "You're stronger than this, Emma. Don't let them break you." She wiped her face with a paper towel and took a deep breath. Her phone buzzed again. On the counter it was Daniel, his name glowing softly on the screen. Her heart jumped. She picked it up, her hands trembling. The message said, "I'm on my way to see you today. Don't be afraid. Her breath caught in her throat. She read it again and again, her heart racing faster each time Daniel was coming here to her office, the one place she had begged him never to visit. She didn't know whether to feel relief or fear. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes. She imagined him walking through those doors, tall, confident, and calm, while everyone stared in shock. She imagined Olivia's face turning pale. She imagined the whispers turning into silence for a moment. She almost smiled, but then fear came rushing back. What if people thought she had only gotten her job because of him? What if they said worse things afterward? She didn't want anyone to think she was proud or showing off. But deep inside, another voice whispered, maybe it's time. Maybe they need to see who you really are. She looked down at the message again and whispered, please, Daniel, don't make a scene. Please just be gentle with them. She tucked her phone away and walked out of the restroom, her head held high, her heart still pounding. The office was quieter now. Some people avoided her eyes. Others whispered behind their screens. She sat back at her desk, her fingers trembling over the keyboard. The clock on the wall seemed louder than usual, each second stretching longer and heavier. She tried to type, but her thoughts kept drifting to Daniel and what might happen when he arrived. The elevator dinged softly somewhere across the room, and for a moment everyone turned their heads. Emma looked up too. Her heart almost stopped, but it was only the mailman dropping off a package. She breathed out slowly, trying to calm herself. She didn't know when Daniel would come, only that he would, and the thought made every second feel like forever. Outside, through the window, the sky was bright and calm, but inside Emma's heart there was a storm waiting to break. She didn't know it yet, but by the time the sun set that day, her life and everyone else's in that office would never be the same again. The office was busy, as always. Phones ringing, people talking, and the sound of keyboards filling the air. But something in the atmosphere felt strange that afternoon, like a quiet tension floating just beneath the noise. Emma sat at her desk trying to focus, but her hands trembled with every word she typed. Her heart raced faster with each passing minute. She kept looking at her phone lying beside her notebook, the message from Daniel still on the screen. I'm on my way to see you today. Don't be afraid. She read it again and again every time she did. Her stomach twisted with a mix of fear and hope. Across the room, Olivia was laughing loudly with her friends. They were planning a weekend party, talking about expensive restaurants and new handbags. One of them looked at Emma and whispered something. They all laughed again. Emma ignored it, pretending to be busy. She told herself to breathe slowly to stay calm, but inside she felt like 1,000 butterflies were fluttering wildly in her chest. She could almost hear Daniel's voice in her head, calm and reassuring, saying, "It will be all right, my love." But nothing felt all right. Then, without warning, everything changed. The sound of an engine roared outside, followed by the sharp screech of tires stopping at the front door. People near the window turned to look, curiosity spreading quickly. One of them gasped and said, "Wait, is that the Grant limousine?" Everyone rushed to the glass wall. Their eyes wide, a sleek black car shone under the sunlight, the company logo on the door clear as crystal. The receptionist at the front desk froze, her mouth opening slightly as if she could not believe what she saw. Olivia frowned and stood up, smoothing her skirt. She said, "Why is that car here? Maybe the CEO has a surprise guest." She laughed proudly, as if the visitor must be coming for her. Emma's heart began to pound harder. She felt her throat tighten, her breath growing shallow. She whispered to herself, "No, it can't be, not now. Please, Daniel, not like this." The doors of the limousine opened slowly, and a tall figure stepped out. The man wore a dark suit that fit perfectly, his movements calm and confident. The sunlight caught his face, and every person near the window gasped at once. Someone whispered, "That's Daniel Grant. That's the billionaire." Himself, no one could understand why he was here at their office. People began whispering to each other in shock. Some quickly fixed their clothes. Others pretended to work but kept glancing toward the entrance. The glass doors opened and Daniel walked, in his shoes clicking softly against the marble floor, his expression steady but serious. His presence filled the entire room like a quiet storm. He looked around once, and then his eyes found Emma sitting frozen at her desk. Their gazes met, and for a second everything else disappeared. The noise, the whispers, the laughter all faded into silence. Olivia rushed forward with a bright fake smile, saying, "Mr. Grant, what an honor to have you here. Welcome to our office. I'm Olivia, the operations manager. Maybe I can help you with whatever you need." Daniel looked at her briefly, his face polite but distant. He said, "Thank you," in a calm voice, "but I'm here to see someone else." Olivia blinked, her smile faltering. She asked, "Oh, may I ask who?" He turned his eyes back to Emma and said, "I'm here to see my wife, Emma Grant." The room went dead silent. Every head turned toward Emma. Even the sound of typing stopped. Emma stood slowly, her hands trembling, her face pale. Everyone stared in disbelief. Olivia's mouth fell open, her fake smile gone, replaced with shock and confusion. Someone whispered, "Did he just say wife?" Another voice said, "No. Wait, it can't be her. She's just an assistant." But Daniel was already walking past them, every step firm. And sure, he stopped in front of Emma and smiled gently, his eyes soft and filled with love. He said, "Sorry I'm late, darling. Traffic was terrible." His voice warm and steady. Emma couldn't speak. She felt the world spinning around her. She looked at him, then at everyone watching her. She whispered softly, "Daniel, what are you doing here?" He smiled again and said, "What I should have done long ago, showing them who you really are." He reached out and took her hand. The entire office gasped as he lifted her hand and kissed it gently in front of everyone. Olivia stood frozen, her face red with embarrassment. The same people who laughed at Emma earlier were now whispering in disbelief. Daniel turned to them and said kindly, "I just came to take my wife to lunch. I hope you don't mind." There was complete silence. No one dared to speak. Emma's coworkers exchanged glances. Some lowered their heads, unable to meet her eyes. Emma's heart pounded. She wanted to hide, but at the same time, something deep inside her felt free for the first time. As Daniel guided her toward the exit, people began to step aside, making a clear path. Olivia finally found her voice and said, "Wait, Mr. Grant, I had no idea." Daniel stopped and looked at her calmly, his expression unreadable. He said, "Of course, you didn't. That's the problem then." He smiled again, turned back to Emma and said, "Shall we go love Emma?" Nodded quietly, her hand still in his. They walked out together through the glass doors and into the bright sunlight. Outside, the limousine door opened again. Daniel helped her in with care before getting in himself. The driver closed the door behind them and the car began to move slowly away from the building inside. Emma sat in silence, her heart still racing. Daniel looked at her and said softly, "Now they know who you are, my love." She looked at him, her eyes full of emotion, and whispered, "Yes. But what happens next?" He smiled a secret smile and said, "You'll see very soon." Back at the office, everyone stood in stunned silence, realizing they had just mocked the wife of a billionaire, and that moment would soon become the most unforgettable day of their lives. When the black limousine drove away from the office, everyone was still standing in silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The air felt heavy, like time itself had stopped. The receptionist was the first to whisper, "Did he say wife?" And her voice shook as if she still could not believe what she had just seen. The name Daniel Grant echoed in every corner of the room. The billionaire, the man whose company owned half the city, and the woman everyone had laughed at was his wife, Emma. Grant Olivia sat frozen in her chair, her fingers gripping the edge of her desk, her face pale and her heart racing. She had mocked her, insulted her, and now she realized she had been humiliating a woman who could destroy her career with a single word. She felt a cold sweat on her back, and for the first time in her life, she did not know what to say. Her friends stood beside her, whispering nervously. One of them said softly, "Maybe we should apologize, Olivia." But Olivia just stared at the door where Emma had left, unable to form a single word. Meanwhile, the limousine moved smoothly through the busy streets. Emma sat quietly beside Daniel, her hands resting on her lap, her heart still pounding. She could hardly believe what had just happened. She turned to him, her voice trembling, and said softly, "Daniel, why did you do that?" He smiled gently, his eyes calm and full of warmth, and said, "Because I couldn't watch them hurt you anymore. You don't deserve that, Emma. I've stayed silent long enough. It was time they saw who you really are." She shook her head, still nervous, and whispered, "But they will talk. They will think I showed off. I don't want anyone to respect me just because of your name." He took her hand and said, "They will talk, yes, but they will also learn respect. Not the fake kind that comes from fear, but the real kind that comes from understanding their mistakes." She looked at him for a long moment, her heart torn between love and worry. She finally whispered, "Thank you," her voice barely audible. They reached a quiet restaurant near the river. Daniel had reserved a private room with large glass windows overlooking the water. Everything felt calm and peaceful, compared to the chaos that had filled her morning. The waiter greeted them respectfully and brought tea, while Daniel gently pulled out her chair. She sat down slowly, still lost in her thoughts. Daniel watched her silently for a moment, then said, "Emma, tomorrow we go back to your office together. I have something important to announce." She looked up quickly, her eyes wide, and said, "No. Daniel, please don't." He smiled kindly and said, "Trust me, my love. This will be good for you." That night when they returned home, Emma could not sleep. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying everything that had happened. The laughter, the shock, the way everyone stared at her. She remembered Olivia's face turning pale, and the gasps that filled the room. Her heart ached with a strange mix of sadness and relief. She didn't want revenge. She only wanted peace. She whispered to herself, "Maybe this is the beginning of something new." The next morning she dressed, more carefully than usual, still simple but elegant. A soft blue dress that Daniel had given her months ago. She tied her hair neatly and looked in the mirror, her reflection calmer than she felt. Her hands were cold, but she took a deep breath and said quietly, "You can do this." When she arrived at the office, everyone looked at her, but no one spoke. The whispers that once followed her like shadows were gone, replaced by silence and uneasy stares. Some people smiled politely. Others looked away. Olivia stood near her desk pretending to read some papers, but her hands were shaking. Emma walked to her desk and placed her bag down calmly. A few minutes later, the elevator doors opened and everyone turned. Daniel Grant walked in again this time, with confidence and purpose, his presence filling the entire room. He nodded politely to the staff and said, "Good morning, everyone." Olivia hurried forward again, her voice nervous. "Good morning, Mr. Grant. How can we help you today?" He looked at her and said, "Thank you, Miss Olivia. Please gather everyone in the meeting room. I have something important to say." His tone was calm but firm. No one dared to disobey. Within minutes, the entire team was seated, the air thick with tension and curiosity. Daniel stood beside Emma at the front of the room. He took her hand gently and looked at everyone, his eyes serious yet kind. He said, "I believe you all know my name, but what you may not know is that my wife, Emma Grant, has been working here for months. Quietly and humbly, she never told anyone who she was because she wanted to be valued for her work, not her title. Some of you treated her with kindness and respect, and for that I thank you. But some of you mocked her, judged her, and made her life harder than it should have been." The room was silent. Everyone staring down at their hands. Olivia looked like she might faint. Daniel continued, "From today, my wife will not just be working here, she will be your new head of operations. She has shown more strength and grace than many people I have met in this industry." Emma's eyes widened. She turned to him, whispering, "Daniel, I didn't know about this." He smiled and said, "Now you do, my love. You've earned it." Applause filled the room, awkward at first, then stronger. Some faces lit with genuine admiration, others with guilt. Emma looked around, her voice soft but steady. She said, "I forgive you all. I just hope we learn something from this. Never judge anyone by what they wear or where they come from. Kindness costs nothing but means everything." Olivia stood up, her eyes wet, and whispered, "I'm sorry, Emma, truly I am, Emma." Looked at her with gentle eyes and said, "I know, Olivia, just be better from now on." Olivia nodded silently, her pride broken, but her heart finally learning something real. The meeting ended, and as Emma walked out beside Daniel, everyone stood this time not out of fear, but respect, and for the first time the laughter that had once followed her was replaced with quiet admiration. The next morning the sun rose softly over the city, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and inside the office everyone arrived early, as if something important was about to happen. There was no laughter, no whispering, only quiet respect filling the air. Emma walked through the glass doors, her steps calm and steady, her blue dress flowing lightly as she moved. The same people who once ignored her now greeted her politely with small smiles and lowered eyes. She smiled back with kindness, not pride, because her heart still belonged to the same humble world it always had. Olivia stood by her desk, nervously holding a stack of papers when she saw Emma coming. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward and said in a soft voice, "Good morning, Mrs. Grant." Emma smiled warmly and said, "Just call me Emma, please." Olivia's eyes filled with gratitude. She nodded and whispered, "Thank you, Emma, for giving me another chance." Emma placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and said, "Everyone deserves one." The office soon began to feel different. Laughter returned, but it was softer, warmer, without cruelty. People started helping one another instead of competing. Emma's leadership had brought calm and care into a place that had once been full of gossip and pride. She never raised her voice. She never showed off her power. She led with patience and empathy, and slowly even those who once mocked her began to admire her for the person she truly was. Every day she made sure to greet everyone by name, to ask if they were doing well, to listen when someone had a problem, and her words carried a quiet strength that touched hearts. She reminded them often that success was not built on stepping over others, but on lifting each other up. Her message spread quickly through the company like sunlight chasing away shadows. One afternoon, a new intern arrived, a young woman dressed in simple clothes, shy and uncertain. She reminded everyone of the old Emma, the one they had laughed at months before. Some of the staff looked at her and smiled kindly. One of them even said, "She'll be fine here." We all learned our lesson. Emma overheard that, and her heart filled with warmth. She was proud not of herself, but of how far everyone had come. Later that day, Daniel came to visit again, but this time not in a grand limousine. He came quietly in a simple car and walked straight to Emma's office. She was reviewing some files when he entered. She looked up and smiled brightly, saying, "I thought you had a meeting." He laughed softly and said, "I did, but I wanted to see how my favorite boss was doing." She blushed slightly and said, "I'm not the boss, you are." He shook his head and said, "No, my love, this place belongs to you. Now, you made it shine." They talked for a while, sharing tea and soft laughter, the kind of laughter that comes from peace. Daniel looked at her with pride and said, "I knew you would change this place, Emma. You changed me too. You reminded me what real strength looks like." Emma smiled and said, "Strength means nothing without kindness." He nodded and said, "That's why you're the best leader I've ever met." As the day went on, Emma walked around the office, helping others, answering questions and listening to ideas. She noticed how different everything felt. Now there was teamwork, friendship, and hope. The cold air of judgment had disappeared, replaced by respect built from sincerity. It wasn't about wealth anymore, it was about heart. When evening came, most people had gone home, but Olivia stayed behind. Working on a report, Emma walked past and saw her still typing. She stopped and said, "Go home, Olivia, you've done enough for today." Olivia looked up smiling and said, "I don't mind staying a little longer. I actually enjoy my work now." Emma felt tears in her eyes, not of sadness, but of pride. She nodded and said, "That's good to hear. I'm proud of you." Olivia looked down shyly and said, "I'm proud of you too, Emma." As Emma left the building, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the city. She stood for a moment outside, looking at the tall buildings and the busy streets. She remembered the first day she had walked there alone, carrying her cheap bag, her heart full of fear and pain. And she smiled because now she knew everything had happened for a reason. Every cruel word, every tear, had led her to this moment where she could stand strong and gentle at the same time. When she reached home, Daniel was waiting for her on the porch holding 2 cups of hot coffee. He handed her one and said, "Long day." She nodded and said, "But a good one." They sat together watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky, the air cool and calm. She leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, "I used to think being kind made me weak, but now I know it makes me strong." Daniel smiled and said, "The world needs more hearts, like yours, Emma." They sat there in silence for a while, listening to the sound of the night, the rustle of leaves, the quiet hum of the city below. Their house lights glowing softly through the windows of the mansion. It no longer felt like a place of wealth, it felt like a home built on love and humility. The next morning, Emma went back to work as usual, still simple, still kind, still humble. And when she walked through those glass doors, every person in the office stood up. Not because she was rich, not because she was powerful, but because they respected her from their hearts. And in that moment, the woman they once mocked had become their greatest teacher, showing them that true worth is never worn on the outside. It lives quietly within. And from that day on, no one in that office ever laughed at kindness again.